Welcome, time travelers. This is your director of time travel, Mary Barbara Hanna with Parkersburg Tours. Today, we are exploring the early life of George Washington and how it came to impact the history of Parkersburg. So, here is his brother, or I should say half brother, Lawrence, and George were half brothers through their father, Augustine Washington Sr. I told you a little bit about this in the episode about Lawrence Washington, but we'll recap. So, Lawrence's mother was a woman named Jane Butler, and while Augustine was away on business in England, Jane died, unfortunately. And because communications were what they were at the time, carrier pigeon, not even that, you know, the mail, and then you had to put it on a boat, and the boat had to get to the England, and then from England to wherever you were located. So until Augustine didn't find out about Jane's death until several months later when he actually had returned to Washington. Eventually, he married a woman named Mary Ball. Now, he and Mary had several children together, and it won't surprise you as you gaze upon the visage of Mary Ball that she is the mother of George Washington. Now, it could just be me. I am not an art historian. I don't know how artists worked back then, but it might be that the artist took inspiration from the looks of George and put a hat on him. A little woman's clothing thing going on there. Nonetheless, here she is, George's mother. George was only 11 years old when his father died in 1743, leaving George to help his mother and siblings manage the Ferry Farm. Now, this farm was located some miles north of Little Hunting Creek. And you might recall that Little Hunting Creek is where Lawrence lived with his father, Augustine, and his mother, Jane. And then once Augustine remarried, he married Mary. They moved up north to this land, and Lawrence took over Little Hunting Creek. And bonus points, if you can remember, he's the one who named it Mount Vernon, named after his great friend, a man he admired, Admiral Vernon. So George is left caring for this farm with his mother and his younger siblings, and Lawrence lives a little bit further south on Mount Vernon. At this time, with the passage of their father, Lawrence actually stepped up and brought, I should say, George under his tutelage. Now, unlike Lawrence, George would not be schooled in England, and he's going to inherit very little land, and this is going to make for a very bleak future for the intelligent and thoughtful George. Lawrence saw it as his duty to give George every available opportunity, and those opportunities grew exponentially when Lawrence married the beautiful, wealthy, and well-connected Anne Fairfax of Belvoir. Now, Belvoir was located, a plantation located just a few miles from Hunting Creek Farm where Lawrence had grown up and lived. So they probably knew the Fairfaxes most of their lives. They didn't have huge circles of friends because, of course, transportation being what it was. Nonetheless, he married Anne, and this gave him, Lawrence, an enormous push into professional, social, and political success. George would spend a lot of time at his brother's estate, Mount Vernon, and at the home of Anne's family, and that home is called Belvoir, as we see in the picture. It's through these connections at Mount Vernon and Belvoir that George became fast friends with a man named George William Fairfax. He is the brother of Anne and the son of the father. His name is William Fairfax. In the last episode, again, you might recall that William Fairfax is a cousin to and land agent for Lord Fairfax. This is still a colony. They're still under British rule. So all the power that comes and access that comes with being, part of the lords and ladies world, in London, in England, is going to travel over here to the colonies. So these two young men are assigned by Lord Fairfax himself to go and survey some of his lands deeper in Virginia. And this is what begins a nearly lifelong career of surveying for George Washington, that is, because they're both named George. Uh, and it's interesting to think that a life filled with military adventures and political success awaited him, because at this time he loved nothing more than surveying. About 1770, Washington had served in the French and Indian War, which was actually previous to that. So we're talking a time span between like 1752 and 1770. He has actually come out here another time into these areas. He's been in New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Ohio isn't really Ohio in the 1750s because we have to get through the French Indian War. But suffice it to say that he has already started surveying these areas in Western Virginia. The French Indian War happens, and the result of that is that the British colonies add on the Ohio territories. We are not the United States yet, but we add on these Ohio territories. And as is common during these wars, the time of civil unrest, what have you, governments often use lands that they had conquered as awards to those who served in the army. And so this is the same thing. George has been awarded land. He's already surveyed some of this land, so no doubt he has either, put a bug in somebody's ear about, land that he wants, or people know that he's been here, so they award him this land, however it comes to be. Now, the red circle I have there, I want you to, first of all, this is not a map from 1750 or 1770, because these things did not exist. Marietta wasn't there yet, Belpre, none of these little villages were there. But the map itself of the river is absolutely accurate. And so this is an area specifically on the West Virginia side, so the bottom half of that red circle, which is Virginia at the time, is where George Washington is awarded land and comes and surveys that land and buys acres for himself. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But what I want you to know is that he was awarded and owned nearly 10,000 acres along this Ohio River, 2,300 within this red circle. And about, so 2,300 in this red circle. And in particular, where we see Little Kanawha and then over to the left of the Little Kanawha River, going up that river, this area is called Washington Bottom. It still is called that today. And his never, I'll just point out here, he never came back to live here, obviously, because he went on to have the American Revolution and then become president. So he never, I'm sure, and he was sad, I'm sure, about that, even though he loved Mount Vernon. There are lots and lots of documents that talk about or show his love of this area along the Ohio River. Let me see. So this is an example of the very careful notes that he made about the area. This is his handwriting. This is a map that he made that there is available for people to see. And so we know that he was quite detailed and would have made it very possible for him to come back to the exact same area. Plus, these surveyors, this is all they do, and they get very good at laying out directions and knowing degrees north, south, east, west of where they are. As I said, this is the area of Washington Bottom. It looks nothing like it did in his time, starting with those electric poles and the sign and the tractor. He deeded this land once he knew he wouldn't be coming back. Upon his death, this land was to be given to his children, and it went from their children, from his children to their children, and heirs on down the way. Nobody ever came to live in this riverside frontier town. They were living in beautiful homes in areas rich with commerce, education, entertainment, politics, easy access to the waters, the ocean, and so forth. This place would have been so as they say, backwater, poor, uneducated. And which is really why so many people moved here. So once this land is opened up and people can come here, um, that's what motivates a lot of people is because slavery was real and existed in Virginia at this time. And we'll talk more about slavery in a later video. But this issue of people coming west was so they could find work because most people used slave labor. They enslaved people and they used them to their benefit, and that made it impossible or very difficult for other people coming to these colonies to find work. So pushing west, going into these areas where there was no one, they had a much better chance of making a living. They could have as much land as they could afford to get. They could build their home. They could harvest. They could hunt. They could trade. They had timber. We'll talk about those things later. So for some people, it was a dream come true to be able to come out this way. And for others, it was just a nightmare because they were already wealthy and didn't need anything else. And that leads us to the next page or next chapter in our history of Parkersburg, the very early history, because there were already people living here, right? Before those white settlers came, we have the ancient people that had already explored and lived on this land, known as the Mound Builders. And we'll talk more about them in our next episode. Thanks for time traveling with me. I'm Mary Barbara Hanna, your Director of Time Travel. Reach out to me at parkersburgtours.com, parkersburgtours@gmail.com, or drop a text or call 681 507 6188. Until next time.